Back in Beirut, the hostel was loud and crowded, but outside it was quiet, save for the squealing of tires and the beeping of horns as cars jockeyed the front lines of crosstown traffic. Restless, I walked across the city from Mar Mikhael to Harouche, Beirut's westernmost point. As the sun lowered itself to the horizon, church bells clanged and the muezzin released its call to prayer. I stopped, offering prayers of my own to the coming darkness. The song faded and then awakened the soul of the city. Bars and restaurants, closed and locked in the light of day, opened their doors. Voices became louder and cooler temperatures spread from the shadows. In every cafe, men and women smoked shisha, holding the pipe near their lips as they carelessly thumbed their cups of coffee. In passing, they smiled and I regretted that my Arabic, my French, and sometimes even my English, as you well know, were not enough to sustain a conversation. Still, they welcomed me to their country. This constant welcoming reminded me of the opening scene in Pretty Woman when a man walks down a boulevard in Los Angeles saying to everyone he passes, "Welcome to Hollywood." So much so that when "Welcome to Lebanon," I wanted to so badly to respond, "What's your dream?" But this was my dream. A dream made even more real because of the beauty that now surrounded me, more beautiful than anything I had known before. It did not escape notice that the people of Lebanon are as beautiful as their country, especially the men who are all my type. Tan skin, dark eyes, dark hair, dark beards, reckless smiles, and a confidence derived from speaking 3 languages and living on the edge of 2 worlds, of which their beauty was just a reflection. But for this I will not hunger. This pilgrimage was not about this. In all my relationships of the past, I'd fallen too hard, too fast, and it took me too long to recover from the bumps and bruises of the way down. And now neither my heart nor my body was ready to invite a new love into these empty spaces. How could I possibly love another when the door of my heart was only ajar and not fully open? And so I sat alone with my hummus. If there was a better date in all of Lebanon, I would not go on it, not for all the hummus in the world. Across the way, a man spoke first in Arabic, then in French, and finally in English, of the truth of the human experience. Manners be damned, I eavesdropped, leaning to learn more of what he knew of truth, and if it was different than my own. With him sat a woman who spoke as much with her hands as she did her mouth. In gesticulations both wild and tame, she agreed with him before adding truths of her own. She smiled as if happiness was an old friend with whom she shared a secret that she will always keep. Before long, I joined their conversation, bridging the small distance between the tables with warm words and gentle laughter. Her name was Mona, as there was but 4 years between us. We spoke as if we had known one another always and were simply catching up on the years that had been missed. At the end of our meals, we exchanged phone numbers and promised to call one another soon. That Sunday, Mona invited me to spend the day with her family in the mountains. Before noon, she picked me up at the end of Mar Mikhael. Barely was the door shut before she began to shout and curse and beep her horn at all the other drivers for driving as they do in Lebanon, lawlessly. Had I been behind the wheel, I would have done the very same thing. If there were any doubts about this new friendship, they disappeared before we pulled away from the curb. Driving into the hills, she told stories of an unalterable past to which she is both buoyed and bound. A nervous laughter filled the space between the words as she spoke about the years of the Civil War, which consumed her childhood and much of her adolescence. Those the first years of her life were spent huddled in underground bomb shelters. Of the things she remembers, the war above is not among them. What is remembered is how upset she used to get with her mother for not taking her skiing during the war. She did not then understand that those mountains and her beliefs stood in opposition of one another. A sly grin crept across her lips as when she hinted that the rumors that Yasser Arafat used to hide alongside of her family, often dressed as a woman, might actually be true. Years passed and the war went on. As teenagers, she and her friends would go to parties at the place where bombs were dropped only hours before. Maybe she believed bombs to be like lightning, rarely striking the same place twice. It was not until later, much later, she began to realize that what she had lived through. 15 years of war that she'd been unlucky enough to have been born into, but lucky enough to have survived. In the mountains, her family keeps a house full of memories. This is where they came to celebrate holidays, birthdays, Sundays, Sabbath, and summer. This is also the home that became a fortress during the Israeli invasion of 2006. Look it up. Look up some history. That's not part of the book. I didn't include it. But we're going to start to talk about it a lot more because what we're seeing happening right now coincides with all of the things we didn't see for the last 7 years. Just remember that. It all fits together in beautiful little pieces. We'll get back to it. As she spoke about that summer, she gripped the steering wheel tighter, not wanting to remember, unable to forget the July when fire rained down from the sky for 34 days. This assault did not end until the United Nations called for a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, a precarious pact that still teeters on the brink of war. It has yet to find the footholds of peace. The house stands on top of a hill. It is the last on the left, with rose bushes in the driveway, their red petals clinging tightly to their buds as if they were waiting for the summer and not spring. Opening the car door, I was overcome with jasmine so sweet that I would not imagine Lebanon smelling any other way. We were met by Mona's mother at the door, and for a moment I forgot that I was in Lebanon and not New York. So warm was her embrace that I had forgotten that this was not my family. So easily she could have been my aunt and Mona my cousin. The backyard overlooked the white mountains for which Lebanon receives its name. They spread east, separating Lebanon from Syria. In the shade of cedars sat her brothers and sisters, all smiling as warmly as their mother when we appeared. On the edge of the hill, there was an above-ground pool where children splashed and played and invited me to join them. I did not wait to be asked twice for Sundays or just for this. Under a rising moon, we sat at a table surrounded by trees as tall as mountains. This table was no different than that of my mother's, and like that of my mother's, there was not an empty space to be found. Not a seat that was not full. Everywhere were bowls of hummus, plates of fried fish, and salads of grains and greens. Everything was passed from hand to hand with a smile or a gentle nudge of the shoulder. When their children tried to sneak past them, none of them got away without a hug and a kiss and a whisper of "I love you." It reminded me of Christmas. It reminded me of home. After dinner, I sat with Mona's brother, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. At first, he did not speak, a quiet intensity and silence, but then he casually stated, "Mona tells me you're a writer." I nodded, still learning to tell the difference between when words are necessary and when they are not. One by one, the stars appeared. The moon rose high, whiter than the mountains, bathing the face of his family in its light. He looked at them, remembering what peace there is to be found in the darkness. And then he turned to me with an expression so serious that it was hard to look away. "You tell of this. You write of this." There was no need for him to say anything more. He was asking me to write of the heart of Lebanon, its beauty, its people, its kindness, and its generosity. He wanted me to reveal the Lebanon that had been revealed to me, a Lebanon I had already fallen deeply in love with, flaws and all. When the world again fell silent, I promised him I would tell everything. I would write every word, for that was the purpose of this pilgrimage: to seek, to search, to seek, to find, to share, to do as Faulkner said, and to write of the heart and not the glance. Night came, and Mona and I returned to Beirut under a veil of cloud and stars.